You'll never tell anyone? Great. Aints was glad his business know-how was worth something after all. He did a small fist pump under the table. Oh good. And I won't be using magic to enforce your promise. I trust you. Aints stretched out a gauntleted hand. Initially startled, the headman seemed to realize what was going on and took it. Aints was relieved they had handshakes in this world. If he had been given a look like, "What are you doing?" all he would have been able to do was cry. Of course, he didn't trust them completely. If they were offered a reward, and it was good enough, they might spill the beans. By sealing the deal on their character alone, it just depended on their character. It wasn't about which was better. Aints chose to bet on the village headman's decency. If word got out, then it got out. He could just use that fact as a trump card in his next dealings with this village. Recalling their expressions of gratitude and the sincerity of their interactions with him, he felt they wouldn't betray him. Well then, I hope you can teach me many things. What the heck? Is something the matter? Oh no, I was just talking to myself. Excuse me, I didn't mean to shout. For one moment, Aints fell out of character, but he quickly picked up the act again. If he'd had a human body, he would have broken out in a cold sweat. The village headman said only, "I see," and didn't probe any further. Maybe casters already had a reputation as weirdos in the village. That was no problem for Aints. Would you like something to drink? Oh no, that's okay. I'm not thirsty, but thank you for asking. The headman's wife had left. He'd had her go outside to help with the cleanup. Aints and the headman were the only ones left in the room. The first question Aints asked was about the countries in the area. The response listed places he'd never heard of. He'd been prepared for anything, but surprise won out when reality struck him. At first, he ran through many possibilities. He generally thought he must have ended up in the world of Yggdrasil. He could use Yggdrasil magic, so he figured there must be some connection. But now he was met with names of places he was completely ignorant of. The countries in the area were the Rey Estai's kingdom, the Baharuth Empire, and the Slain Theocracy. Yggdrasil's world was based on Norse myths. He'd never heard of any of these places. His eyes were swimming. He felt like he might collapse, but he steadied himself by putting his hands on the table. He just ended up in an unknown world. He'd been prepared to accept it, but he couldn't suppress his astonishment. The shock was just too big. It was the first time something had hit him so hard since becoming undead. In order to calm down, he decided to review what he knew about the surrounding topography. First, the Rey Estai's kingdom and the Baharuth Empire. Their territories were divided by a mountain range. From the southern edge of the mountains stretched a forest. The Rey Estai's kingdom's domain, containing the castle town and this village, began about where the forest ended. The two countries had poor relations. There was fighting on the plains near the castle town every year for the past several years. Then to the south was the Slain Theocracy. To get a rough idea of how their territories fit together, it was easiest to think of an upside-down T tilted up and to the right. But the T was slightly melted, so the long edge bent straight up. The Rey Estai's kingdom was on the left, the Baharuth Empire was on the right, and it was a bit larger. The Slain Theocracy was below the bar of the T. Supposedly there were other countries as well, but that was all the information the village headman could provide. As for the countries' relative power, the headman of a tiny village wouldn't know that, either. In other words, I screwed up. The village headman seemed to think the knights had come from the Baharuth Empire due to the crests on their armor, but in terms of which countries actually shared borders, it was possible the whole thing could have been a plot by the Slain Theocracy. It had been a mistake to let all the knights go. He should have grabbed at least one and gotten some information out of him. Now it was too late. Assuming it had been the Slain Theocracy, then maybe he should strike some kind of deal with the Empire. The kingdom was fine. He'd already earned some goodwill there for saving this village. Aints pondered whether he could really be the only one who'd come to this world. That can't be. There's a huge chance other players are here. Even Hiro might be here. I need to think about what will happen if I encounter other players. If a large number of players had come, knowing Japanese people, many of them would group together. Aints wanted to be part of that if possible. He would make any concessions as long as they didn't have to do with Aints Ul Gaun. The issue would be if that group saw his guild as an enemy. That wasn't completely out of the question. Aints Ul Gaun had role-played evil and done a lot of player killing, so they were widely detested. He wasn't confident that hatred had died out. He might even be antagonized out of a sense of justice or righteous indignation. To avoid that, the first thing to do would be to make as few enemies as possible. If if he killed locals, or especially if he carried out any unnecessary slaughter of humans, it could upset players who still had their humanity. Of course, if he had a convincing reason, for instance, saving a village under attack, it might be a different story. In short, I need a really good reason for everything I do from now on. I didn't want to do this, but I need a procedure. If this group held a grudge against Aints Ul Gaun, Nazarick probably wouldn't be able to avoid combat. Considering their current war potential, they could annihilate 30 level 100 players in one go. And if they used a world item, the tomb would transform into an impregnable fortress. They'd probably be able to fight off any enemies like they had before. But it wasn't hard to imagine how stupid trying to withstand a raid without backup would be. And each time they unleashed the world item's power, Aints' level would go down. If they were attacked in waves, they would eventually be worn down to the point where they couldn't use it anymore. Aints knew focusing on warfare was dangerous because it could lead to bias and a narrower view of things. But he wasn't so naive that he would act without considering the worst possible outcome. He was simply considering how to deal with problems. If he only cared about surviving, maybe he wouldn't have to do all that. He could just live in the mountains and fields like a beast, but he had too much power and pride to do that. If he tried to get along with people, things ought to work out one way or another. In that case, the most important item of discussion was how to increase their war potential. He needed to collect more information about the world, including who the players in it were. There has to be some mistake. Is something wrong? Oh no, things are just a bit different than I thought, so I was momentarily upset. More importantly, could you give me some more information? Oh okay, yes. The headman changed topics to discuss monsters. They had them just like in Yggdrasil. There were dangerous beasts living deep in the woodlands, especially the wise king of the forest. They also had human-like races like dwarves and elves, as well as subhuman races such as goblins, orcs, and ogres. Apparently some of the subhuman races had even established countries. People who went around exterminating monsters for rewards were called adventurers. There were many casters among them. In big cities, there were adventurer guilds. Aints also got some information about the nearest fortress city, Rantel. The headman wasn't sure about the population, but he knew it was the biggest city in these parts. It seemed like it would be the best place to gather information. The information Aints got from the village headman was useful, but there were still lots of unknowns. Rather than trying to get details here, it would be faster to send a party to Rantel. Then, there was the language. Aints thought it strange that everyone knew Japanese in this completely other world, so he tried watching the headman's lips. It wasn't a big deal, but he wasn't speaking Japanese. The movements of his mouth and what Aints was hearing were totally different. From there, Aints did some experimenting. His conclusion, everyone here had eaten translation gum or something, though he didn't know where they'd gotten it. This world's language, or rather the words anyone spoke, would be automatically translated by the time they reached the listener. If a word could be recognized as a word, it would probably work with non-human creatures as well, like cats or dogs. He just had no idea how it was possible. The headman didn't seem to think anything of it. It was taken for granted, so it must just be one of the laws of this world. If he took a step back and thought about it, they did have magic. It wouldn't be strange at all if this world was governed by a whole different set of laws. The common sense Aints had picked up in his life wasn't the common sense of this world. That was a critical problem. Without common sense, he was in danger of committing a fatal error. Nobody ever means anything good when they say, that guy has no common sense, and he was certainly lacking it now. He had to do something, but no brilliant moves came to mind. He couldn't just grab someone and say, tell me all your common sense. That would be ridiculous, which left him with basically one option. I guess I need to go live in a city, huh? To learn common sense would take a large number of examples. He also needed to learn about this world's magic. There were too many things he still needed to find out. As he was going over all of this in his head, he heard the faint sound of footsteps in the dirt outside the thin wooden door. The interval between steps was large, but it didn't sound like stomping. It was a man in a hurry. The knock came just as Aints had turned to face that way. The headman looked to Aints to see how he wished to proceed. He must feel awkward doing anything of his own volition when he's in the middle of a discussion about payment for saving the village. Go ahead, no problem. I was just wanting a break anyhow. I don't mind if you go out, my apologies. The headman gave a slight bow and walked toward the door. When he opened it, a villager was standing there with the sun at his back. His eyes went from the headman to Aints. I'm sorry to interrupt, but the preparations for the funeral are complete. I see. The headman looked Aints' way, as if requesting permission to leave. I don't mind. Don't worry about me, thank you. Then please tell everyone I'll join you presently. The funeral began in the public cemetery on the outskirts of town. The cemetery was surrounded by a shabby fence. Round stones with names carved on them dotted the yard. These served as grave markers. The village headman appealed to gods Aints had never heard of in Yggdrasil. He wanted the deceased to rest in peace. There weren't enough hands to bury all the corpses at once, so they were starting with what they could. Aints thought it seemed hasty to bury people that very day, but there were no religions he was familiar with here. All he could do was accept it as different. Among the villagers present were the sisters he had saved, Henry and Nemu Emot. Their parents must have been getting buried that day. Aints watched from a little ways away from the others. He ran his hands over a wand under his robe. It was about 12 inches long and made of elephant ivory. One tip was dipped in gold. The grip was inscribed with runes. This gave the whole object a sacred vibe. It was a wand of resurrection, a magical item that could revive the dead. He had more than just that one, though. He had enough to bring back everyone in the village, with change left over, but according to the headman, magic that could bring back the dead didn't exist in this world, so a miracle could occur in this village. As the prayer ended and the funeral entered its last stages, Aints quietly put the wand back in his item box. He could bring them back. He just didn't. It wasn't because he was concerned for their souls or had some religious reason. There just wasn't anything in it for him. There were casters who could kill and casters who could revive. It wasn't hard to imagine either type getting caught up in some kind of trouble. Even if he did it on the condition they stayed quiet about it, the chance of them sticking to that was low. Who wouldn't drool over the power to oppose death? If the situation changed, maybe he could use it. But for now, he didn't have enough information. Now was not the time. I'll have them be satisfied with the fact that I saved the village, he murmured. Then he turned to take a hard look at the Death Knight standing behind him. He had some questions about this guy too. In Yggdrasil, with a few exceptions, summoned monsters expired after a set time. Since he hadn't used any special method to summon this Death Knight, its time should have been up a long time ago, but it was still here. Aints had various guesses about what was going on, but without more information, he couldn't reach an answer. Next to Aints and his thoughts, two shadows lined up. They were Albedo and a spider-like monster the size of a human wearing ninja gear. From each of its 8 legs grew a sharp blade. An 8-edged assassin. Albedo Aints scanned the area, but there was no sign of any villagers looking their way. Even in the middle of a funeral, the sight of Albedo, and especially the bizarre monster, should have been enough to draw attention. Then he remembered 8-edged assassins could turn invisible. I brought him because he said he wanted to see you, Lord Aints. I do hope you are in good spirits, Lord Momo, spare me the flattery. More importantly, are you my reinforcements? Yes, sir. There are 400 minions under me ready to raid the village. Raid? Why do they think we're raiding? Sebas, this is like a bad game of telephone. There's no need to attack. The issue is already resolved. And who is commanding you? Mistress Aura and Master Mare. Master Demiurge and Mistress Sholtia are defending the castle. Master Cocytus is guarding the area. I see. If there are too many minions out, they'll just get in the way. Have everyone except Aura and Mare withdraw. How many of you 8-edged assassins came? 15 in all. Okay, then you guys stand by with Aura and Mare. After receiving the 8-edged assassin's bow, Aints turned back to the funeral proceedings. Right as some dirt was being thrown onto a fresh grave, the two sisters collapsed in tears. Realizing the funeral wouldn't end anytime soon, he headed slowly back to the village. Albedo and the Death Knight followed behind him. Although they'd been interrupted by the funeral, by the time Aints left the headman's house, after learning about the area and some common sense, the sun was sitting low in the sky. He'd made this dramatic rescue as a favor to an old friend, but it had taken more time than he'd expected. He did feel like the benefits balanced it out, though. even realizing that the more he learned about the world, the more questions he had was worth it. Aints ran his mind over the things he had to do while gazing absent-mindedly at the setting sun. It was extremely dangerous to act without being fully informed. The best thing to do would have been to stay hidden and gather information on the down low, but now that he had saved this village, that was no longer possible. Even if he had annihilated those knights, their country would have wanted to investigate what had happened to them. In his own world, scientific investigation was advanced, but it was possible that in this world some other way of investigating had advanced. Even if they weren't advanced, as long as there were villagers alive, there was a high chance they'd be able to find out about him. One way to make sure no information leaked was to take all the villagers to the great tomb of Nazareth, but it wouldn't be strange for the kingdom to consider that abduction. And so he had given his name and let the knights go. He had two aims in this. As long as he wasn't hiding out in the great tomb of Nazareth, he guessed word of him would spread quickly. So his first aim was to spread word of himself to some extent. He figured it would be good to guide that process. The second aim was to spread the story of how someone called Aints Ul Gaun saved a village and killed knights. Of course, the ones he most wanted to hear the rumor were Yggdrasil players. Aints wanted to belong to either the kingdom, the empire, or the theocracy. He was sure that if other players were in this world, rumors of them would spread. But if Aints belonged to an organization called Nazareth, it would be bound to be difficult to acquire information, not to mention risky. And if he made the mistake of giving orders to someone with a personality like Albedo, he might inadvertently make unnecessary enemies. Even just from the standpoint of acquiring information, it seemed like getting under the umbrella of one of the countries would be a good idea. In order to maintain the self-governance of the Great Tomb of Nazareth, it would be good to have the backing of some authority. He couldn't take his situation lightly as long as he was in the dark about the relative strength of the countries. Not knowing the limit of individual power in this world also spurred him on. He couldn't assume there was no one stronger than him in any of the three countries. He could think of plenty of downsides to becoming a member of one of the countries, but he felt the upsides outweighed them. The problem was, in what position would he join them? He wasn't about to be somebody's slave. He also wasn't interested in being employed at a company with horrible working conditions like Hero. He would have to try to impress the various powers. Then he could choose the best place once he'd seen the differences in how they treated him. It was just like changing jobs. So it was just a question of when to start making connections. I might get taken advantage of as I am now, with barely any information. Aints thought about that before shaking his head as if he were a bit tired. He'd used his brain a crazy amount during the past several hours. It was painful to think anymore. Phew, all right. I've done what I came here to do. Albedo, let's withdraw. Yes, my lord. Albedo was bristling despite the fact she had no reason to be on guard. There was no danger in this village. In that case, Aints could only think of one explanation. He lowered his voice and asked, "Do you hate humans? I'm not fond of them. They're such fragile creatures, lower life forms. I always wonder how pretty they'd be if I squashed them under my feet like bugs. Oh, but there is one exception. A girl, her voice was sweet as honey, but the words she spoke were severe." Aints considered the beauty that made her look like a goddess full of love and felt her attitude was unbecoming. He replied to admonish her somewhat. "I understand how you feel. Please keep your composure and treat them kindly. It's important to put on the act." Albedo deeply bowed her head. Watching her, Aints worried. Her preferences wouldn't cause problems for the moment, but he wondered about the future. He realized he needed to be aware of his subordinates' likes and dislikes. With that, he decided to try to find the village headman. He wanted to be polite and say goodbye before leaving. The headman was easy enough to locate. He was conferring in a corner of the square with some villagers. Their faces looked serious, but something seemed off. They appeared nervous. More trouble? Aints refrained from clicking his tongue and went over to them. He figured he might as well find out what was happening. "Is something wrong, Mr. Headman?" It was like a ray of heavenly light beamed across his face. "Oh, Lord Aints. We have word that mounted knights are heading toward the village." "I see." The headman looked nervously at Aints. The villagers did the same. He held up a hand to calm them. "Leave this to me. Gather all the villagers in your house at once, then meet me in the square." A bell rang. While the villagers gathered, Ainst positioned the Death Knight outside the headman's house and Albedo behind himself. Ainst spoke to the headman in a cheerful voice to assuage his fears. "Don't worry, I'll give you a freebie just this once." The headman's trembling lessened somewhat and he smiled wryly. Perhaps he had been prepared for the worst. It wasn't long before a group of cavalrymen came into view down the main road. They rode in formation and proceeded quietly into the village. Their gear doesn't match, they've all got custom setups. Does that mean they're not part of a regular army? Watching the cavalrymen, Ainst felt something was off about their equipment. The knights who had come before with the Empire's crest emblazoned on their chests all had matching heavy armor, but these cavalrymen were wearing armor. Everyone had arranged their equipment to their own liking.